What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation. I know everyone can't wait for that. And I wouldn't be a lawyer if I didn't do that. And I'm going to run through just some background information on collecting royalties in the modern age with a focus on the Music Modernization Act. So I'll do that. That won't take long. I know that everyone's got a little content fatigue, or at least I do. So we'll try to, we're not trying to keep this short, but we want to respect your time, understanding that, we all have attention span issues. So, and again, if everyone could keep their volumes on mute until you're asking questions, that would be fantastic. And I will go ahead and get started on the background information. Let me just share my screen. Well, do let me know, or let Jean know if you're unable to see something. Let's see, here we go. Share. Okay. From the beginning. All right. So the theme of this workshop is really how to make it easier to get paid for your music, right? That's the whole point of the Music Modernization Act. And, frankly, to make it harder for others to steal your music, right? And that's something that I am very passionate about as an advocate, as an attorney, have been. It's one of the reasons why we co-founded the Ella Project back in 2004, was because we saw over and over again, too many times musicians, compromising or having their rights compromised, whether, they meant to, most of the time not, right? Or not. And so, since then, we've dealt with issues that, are germane to copyright and other legal issues. That goes without saying. But over the course of time, with this global marketplace developing online, this digital marketplace that was, I guess when we co-founded this organization, it was 2004. So, there was a marketplace, but we all know, there was that period of time where, I remember the dial-up days, and I don't think it was long after, I remember when I graduated from law school in 2003, it still being kind of a pain in the ass to get on the internet, taking a long time, and people weren't really shopping or accessing music that much. They were, but not like they are today. And so the point of that, the reason why I go into that, and I know this is something that you all already know, and I'm preaching to all the bishops here, but what happened over time is, the consumption trends, went, away from obviously the consumption of physical records to, downloads. And isn't it crazy to think of, we were talking about downloads, digital permanent downloads just a few years ago, and now everyone is streaming. And so what happened is that the Copyright Act, sorry, please mute yourself.
Right. Yes.
If you have not already, because I can't really see the screen.
She's getting up to her fighting.
Really do it. So, at any rate, so what happened was that, the Copyright Act really hasn't been substantially, changed or amended since, before I was born, which was a long time ago. A long time ago, and becoming longer and longer ago. Right?
How long?
I have to make this work. A while. I'm not going to go into exactly when, but there's obviously, update with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which basically extended to, multinational corporations, the Safe Harbor Act, and we're not talking about we're not talking about that so much today. But what we are talking about is how the industry has responded to the obvious gaps, to the needs of rights holders in connection with the consumption of music, online, mostly through streaming, right? Because again, this Copyright Act, was substantially amended in 76. That was, again, like before I was born. So people were wearing bell bottoms then. So, there needed to be updates, and there were some obvious needs with respect to the way that royalties are collected and administered, particularly when it comes to streaming. So, while the rights holders, of music have these rights, you know, the availability of the use of the mechanisms needed to collect on these rights, to administer the rights, to enforce the rights, has been very difficult. And so that is what the Music Modernization Act seeks to remedy. It seeks to make it easier for you to collect your royalties, to administer your rights, and to enforce your rights. Now, that being said, I don't know. There's a lot of questions that are unanswered at this point, because this is a relatively new act. It was signed in 2008 or 2018 rather. But there are some knowns, and that's what we're going to go over today. And then we're going to talk about the importance of you making it easier, again, to get paid for your music, harder for folks to steal from you, and why you ought to really, really, really take this time as an opportunity to organize your catalog, right? Which is a pain. It can be, but it's something that needs to be done. And this is no better time to do it than now. And then to make sure you're registered with every single organization, or not every organization, but the organizations that you need to be for purposes of collecting, because that's going to become, it's been important, but it's going to become more important than ever. So we're going to go over the copyright definition, which you already understand. We're going to talk about, the registration and infringement. And then we're going to do a brief background on the Music Modernization Act and into the performance right. And then I will turn the mic over to Luke. Trying to figure out how to get this. Okay, there we go. I have to click on a bunch of things for this to work. So when I talk about rights holders and I talk about how the music modernization impacts the rights holders, of course, we're talking about copyright. And you already know that a copyright is a bundle of rights, including that right to reproduce, to prepare works, to distribute, to publicly perform, to display. And we're talking mostly, when we talk about music, we're talking with the major focus on the reproduction right and the distribution right when it comes to streaming, and the public performance right. So that is what we're going to be focused on today. And of course, copyright subsists. Copyright is not a work of art. It's not music. It's connected. It's a right that is connected to music, and it subsists in expressions of original works of authorship. And you already know what that is. If you are a musician, you're making music, and in the process of making music, you may be writing songs, you may be recording, or you may be doing both. And so we're going to talk about, again, music. When we look to music, we look, and we're examining the relationship music has to copyright. There are always two rights implicated, or two copyrights implicated. So music has two sides. It's what we call it in industry. You already know that. Okay, so you have the musical composition, and then you have the sound recording. And as you all know, we commonly refer to as the musical composition as the publishing, and the sound recording the master. And we have to go over duration, just because it's constantly it's up for debate, mostly by the likes of Disney. And I used to say, and George Lucas, but now Disney owns all of Star Wars and everything that George Lucas owns, so it's pretty much just Disney now. But currently, of course, copyright is for the life of the author, of the creator, which is you all, plus 70 years, or 95 years from publication, or 120 years from creation. And that comes into play with the Music Modernization Act, particularly as it relates to pre-1972 sound recordings, which we'll talk about in a second. This is kind of one of my favorite parts. My students always go, Ashlye, or Professor Keaton, just, like modernize yourself. But anyway, let me go ahead and admit a couple people to the waiting room. These are those kinks that we knew that we would have that will work out over time. So, copyright registration. It's kind of hard for me to talk about copyright registration right now without rolling my eyes, because it's been a very unsettling year with copyright registration, with the registration process. As an attorney, I have to say that it is in your best interest to register your copyrights. The poor man's copyright, as it was called, as it's still called, is a myth. Okay, so you cannot register your copyrights by simply, you know, depositing a copy in the mail and mailing it to yourself. That doesn't hold up anywhere. So if you want your copyrights registered with the Library of Congress, it is important to do so. The advantages of doing that is that, you know, it provides public record to the public, you know, assuming that the Copyright Office actually updates their database regularly, that you have registered that copyright. Makes it easier to find you. After 5 years, if no one's contested, you know, your registration, then you know, there's a presumption that the music is yours, and anyone who wants to challenge that is going to have to initiate the process, which includes, you know, of course, paying for attorney's fees. Nobody wants to have to do that. So there's that. The most important thing that I used to say about registering copyrights was that, you know, for a very small fee, you could register a bunch of works at once, and you had automatic standing to file suit in federal court. And at the time, for 35 bucks, that was basically a pretty cheap insurance policy that gave you the teeth needed to, I mean, I recognized it in most cases. Like, people do not go to court, and that is still the case. But again, for 35 bucks, if you could put a bunch of songs in the application, please mute yourselves, guys. Then you could, then, you know, you had, for me as an attorney, I had the privilege of being able to insert that serial number in a cease and desist letter, for instance. And that, you know, it's not a scare tactic, but it, you know, again, it shows the demonstration that, you know, you have your business together to some degree. Again, it's cheap insurance, 35 bucks at the time. And, you know, it's automatic standing to file in federal court, which at the time, and still is, generally considered the preferred jurisdiction, if you will, to pursue a case for infringement. That said, over the past year and a half or so, the procedures for copyright registration have changed pretty dramatically. So, the filing fees have gone up. In fact, during the pandemic, they doubled, which I was not a big fan of. Like, really, are we going to do that during the pandemic when you know, musicians are pretty much prohibited from working? But digress. Beyond that, the Supreme Court last year came down with a ruling that you did not file a lawsuit in federal court for infringement unless and until the registration is approved. So prior to that ruling, I would simply file for a registration for a client, get a serial number, and I literally had 2 federal cases that I won where I got a copyright registration serial number, you know, the day before, filed in federal court, and won before the damn thing was registered. And that's not an option anymore. So I have to say that it's important to register your works, but you can only register up to 10 unpublished works at a time. If you're not releasing albums, if you're doing singles, you know, every week or month or what have you, those are separate filings, and you can't lump them all together anymore once they're published, because the Copyright Office is actually checking those things. So it becomes a little bit more expensive. And, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, how am I to say, yeah, just, you know, spend all your money at the Copyright Office, you know, releasing singles every week or every month or what have you? Again, as an attorney, I think it's a good idea to register your copyright, but what's important for you to know is that, as most of you already know, you know, you have all of those rights, that bundle of rights, you know, the exclusive right to reproduce, distribute, publicly perform, you know, to prepare derivative works to exhibit from the time you complete your music. You know, you don't have to have a registration. You have those rights. Now, I think we're going to see a lot more people filing lawsuits in state court, to the extent that people are filing lawsuits, because, like I said, this is becoming more expensive than it used to be. But that being said, you know, it is something you can afford to do. It is certainly. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because it's a pretty big departure from the previous sort of way of the Copyright Office, which was to provide, I mean, for 15 years, I was practicing, the costs were the same. You could bundle a bunch of songs into one application, and the Copyright Office would actually work with you if, for whatever reason, you failed to include one of your deposit copies or something along those lines. And they're just not doing that anymore. In fact, they're rejecting applications without refunding people. So just be aware of that, and and come to see me individually if you're looking to pursue copyright registration, because I want to make sure that you do it correctly, because the procedures have changed and they will not refund you anymore. So just know that. So after my diss on the Copyright Office, we'll go into copyright infringement. So you all know what that is. So anyone who infringes, or anyone who copies your work without your permission, is engaging in potentially copyright infringement. And the way you prove that, the way you show that, which is so easy to do in the digital age, right, is you show ownership, and then you show that the opposing person, or the potential infringer, actually copied the work or compromised it in some way. And the thing about the online marketplace and the digital products, digital works, is that there's a timestamp on everything now. I mean, that was not always the case. It's much easier to prove infringement. It's much easier to prove who created something first. It's almost by design. I mean, I think you have to work hard not to do that. So, whereas, you read about these cases, and they still do exist, where you have to show evidence that's circumstantial. You hear about the look and feel tests, and did someone, really, does that melody sound a lot like mine? And you compare sheet music and that sort of thing. Well, that still happens, but more often is the case where you have, you show infringement through direct evidence. And if it's a recording, that's pretty easy to do these days. So that's another reason why I'm not saying don't register your works, but I'm saying that the consumption trends, while the act may not have caught up with the trends, the consumption and the way that music is created has almost not undermined the importance of the act, but presented its own set of solutions, which is a good thing. And you all can talk about that much more clearly than I can, because you can tell I'm not like a tech savvy person, but I think that, just by mastering a record alone, again, you have that timestamp. So you have the timestamp of, all of the not raw footage, but the unfinished works as well. So that's something that ought to ease your minds a bit. So stepping away from copyright, with the understanding that the Music Modernization Act was developed, purposely to address some of those gaps in rights holders' ability to administer and to enforce and, of course, collect on their rights. Let's go into why this act was created. I think, again, we all know. Spotify is kind of like, we can blame everything on Spotify. Really, at the end of the day, the record companies asked for it, right? They spent 10 years beating up Napster, and they finally, won the case against Napster. And while they were doing that, they were issuing licenses. They were issuing options for these, for similar tech companies to develop similar software and technology. And the record companies, bet against tech, and tech won. And so Spotify, had the right to develop the software to basically do exactly what Napster did. And it was within, a year or two after the record labels spent all that time completely abandoning any platforms, online platforms like stores, for buying records. At the time, you couldn't go to Universal or Sony or Warner or any of the other record labels online and buy a record. So, iTunes basically, Apple came out and said, all right, we're going to basically, develop this iPod and iTunes and, control the market share. And, that started with, obviously, with downloads. And then, Spotify, had the first real, mass working model for streaming. And it started in Europe, and the labels fought it here, publishers fought it here, but they had already approved it. So there you have it. And so now people, instead of buying records, they stream records. And I think it's a huge distinction. I think that, records are less so for sale and more so for stream. And that is exactly why the Music Modernization Act was developed, to address the challenges that are inherent in people streaming music nonstop, and it not being considered like a not being as traceable, because you're doing it through these digital platforms instead of through singular transactions. So it's, I mean, when you think about what you stream on a daily basis, I mean, do you keep track of everything you stream? I mean, it's in your account, right? But imagine, which you can because you're musicians. I mean, the conundrum here, it's like, okay, well, I mean, there's a cajillion streams every day through a handful of platforms, and they're just not paying out mechanicals, and they're not paying out, other royalties that they need to pay. And it's because it's an administrative nightmare. And so, I don't think that, I think that the Music Modernization Act was kind of like a recognition that even though that's an infringement, that without some sort of framework to help these streaming platforms, these digital service providers, to actually do what they're supposed to legally, that they're just not going to do it, because they weren't. And that's why the Music Modernization Act was created. It was introduced by Senator Orrin Hatch and signed by President Trump on October 11th, 2018, and endorsed by Kid Rock and many others. Sorry, it just tickles me because I'm like, what could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong there? And for a while, we really didn't know about the mechanics of the MMA. We're learning more, and I'm optimistic about it, more optimistic than I was in the beginning. But I was just like, God, I could point to more than a majority of the photo of the people in that photo and just go, oh, okay, yeah, it's gonna go really well. But I do think that there is a demonstration that the act will, perhaps do what it's supposed to do, which is to make it easier for you to get paid. So the major changes with the Music Modernization Act is that it establishes a musical works database. You all know that there are databases, there are existing databases, mainly through, BMI, ASCAP, CSAC, the performance rights organizations, now Sound Exchange. And of course, there's always been, not always, but Harry Fox. And we all know well, at least I do, and I know a lot of you do, the platforms for, determining who owns something. So if you all are, want to cover music, you start with BMI, ASCAP, CSAC, you go to Harry Fox, and you go to now you can go, to the actual publishers' websites, and they tend to have better, more comprehensive archives than they did, even a couple of years ago. So, I mean, it's like a fishing expedition to determine who has the rights to something. And I can tell you, just last week, I was dealing with a dispute over who owned the composition to a major work that has great historic significance that is going to be featured in a movie produced by Denzel Washington. And everyone's like, I don't know who owns it. There's like 3 publishers, on 3 different, legitimate, archival sites, databases. And so I think there's a recognition that happens, and that, it's important to try to streamline all this information. I hope it works. And if so, then that ought to help in aiding, preventing people from claiming what's not theirs, but also help you to, insofar as being identified as the rights holder, to get paid. The other thing it does is it sets new blanket royalty rates, and there's an entity that will be overseeing that, and we'll get into it in a second. And those are blanket royalty rates that will be established by a nonprofit arm that is established by the Music Modernization Act, and that organization has been established today, which is really good news. I didn't think it would. I thought it would take forever. I'm kind of shocked that it's already been. So that's a good thing, because I'm a cynic. So yay! So there's progress being made. There's also another change that the Music Modernization Act put into place was that it revamped, it will revamp the court process for challenging royalty rates. So currently, there's like one court in the Southern District of New York where you go to challenge royalty rates, and what could possibly, wrong there, a single judge overseeing or a single court overseeing challenges to royalty rates. I don't know, that's why we have a system and not, one specific court. So that will help in the current deficiencies related to lack of transparency. So the revamping of the court process is supposed to further the mission of promoting greater transparency, which is a major goal of the Music Modernization Act. The act also established the Classics Act, which is very important because it says for the first time that pre-1972 sound recordings are works of art recognized by Congress. I mean, prior to this, the recording for What a Wonderful World and, all the Sinatra recordings and hell, the Beatles recordings, it's just not considered, a work of art per, congressional legislation. And now they are. So that's a hallelujah, praise the Lord, it's about damn time, right? And it also establishes rights for music producers. And that's a really good thing because all of you who are music producers know that, I mean, of course, it is the most overused term in the English dictionary, but some producers, depending on the scope of what they're doing, are part of the creative process, right? And play a role that that would warrant, co-authorship insofar as the contributions they're making. Some producers won't, and that's going to be, a case-by-case determination. But for those who are, there's a formal recognition that music producers are entitled to rights now. We'll see how that plays out. All right. Sorry, I just can't help post like pictures of Kid Rock because it's fun. And his best friend is Sydney Torres, so it's easy. Anyway. So the administration and the oversight of the Music Modernization Act. So what legislation stipulated that there would be a creation of a nonprofit agency for carrying out that database, the royalty rate setting that would distribute the royalties. And the members of this nonprofit are supposed to be major publishers, songwriters, nonprofit organizations like the Recording Academy, a organization. And so that is what, sorry, I'm going back. That is what this nonprofit that will be administering these rights. And that's what I was kind of skeptical about in the beginning. I'm like, again, Sony, Warner, Universal, Recording Academy, same players as usual, maybe a couple of songwriters. Hopefully they'll get this right. Well, recently, the Mechanical Licensing Collective, and I say recently, relatively recently, was established, and it does, the makeup, the oversight of this entity, of this collective, is comprised of publishers, like a couple of songwriters, and sort of nonprofit organizations. I went through their board of directors and the advisory board today, and it was, but I mean, it definitely is, again, comprised of those major publishers. And that when the major publishers and record labels, are not getting paid what they want to get paid, they have every incentive of making sure this thing works. So that's the one thing you can count on, right? Going back to the implications for those of you who are songwriters and for those of you who are recording artists, and obviously some of you are both, and I like to use my images of our great New Orleans artists, that for the, again, for the songwriters, this Mechanical Licensing Collective is going to administer and oversee the royalty rate settings, the database, and collecting the royalties. Now, you can opt out of this process, but for the most part, this is going to be like not an arm of the performance rights organizations, but it kind of looks like that. It's establishing a database, much like when you're inputting your catalog into BMI or to ASCAP. that's what, you know, I went through the whole thing today, and that's what it looks like. And I just think it's, you know, going to be another platform for you to register so that, you know, the database will reflect your ownership of the works. And that's something that we will talk about when it becomes effective in January. And we can start, as I understand it, we can start registering, you know, songwriters, rights holders today. I have not tried that yet, but I've the process. It's pretty easy, like really easy. So that's something that you should, you know, prepare for as songwriters or publishers. Now, again, the Classics Act extends to copyright protection to pre-1972 sound recordings. So now, going back to duration, you know, the pre-72 sound recordings will have copyright protection not for the life of the author plus 70 years, but 95 years from publication. It just makes it easier for administrative purposes, or so they say. So that is the rule with the 72 sound recordings. So 95 years from whenever a recording was published, that will be the duration of the copyright. Again, there's Cosmo Matassa. I'm sure that Cosmo, ooh, I got his name wrong. Hopefully you all can't see that. I knew Cosmo very well. And God, he had a great memory. Like, I think I have a great memory. But I can promise you that this man would tell you that some of the stuff he did was subject to copyright protection, and a lot of stuff he did was not, you know, as a producer. You know, if he was just, you know, pressing buttons or what have you, but if he was more involved, and he would be the kind of person that would be really great to have around right now to really explain the difference in a producer, you know, being entitled to in copyright or not, but he's not. And there are plenty of other producers, and Lou, I'm counting on you for that, to talk about those distinctions. But one of the reasons why I talk about, you know, the rights to the music supervisors and you know, we're stepping away for a second from songwriters and talking more about performers, sound recording copyright owners, including some producers. It's really important now more than ever to register with Sound Exchange, which, for those of you who do not know, is basically, it's a performance rights organization, not equivalent to BMI and ASCAP and CSAC, but it is like that insofar as it collects broadcast royalties for sound recordings. And so it only collects for non-terrestrial, from non-terrestrial sources, such as Pandora, Sirius XM, you know, any satellite radio, and not, you know, from all of the collection points that the composers' rights organizations collect from. It still collects, and it is much more transparent than BMI and ASCAP have ever been. And I know folks who actually write their music and have recordings that are played on, you know, non-terrestrial radio, and they're getting larger checks from Sound Exchange than they are from BMI and ASCAP. And that's interesting to me, because again, Sound Exchange only collects from a limited, you know, collection point pool. So the fact that, you know, you're getting more money in some cases from Sound Exchange than from the composers' rights organizations kind of goes to one of the points of the Music Modernization Act, which is to encourage greater transparency and to really streamline these processes, because there's some shady shit happening, right? And we need to come to terms with these discrepancies, like how it would be possible for the writer of a composition that is being broadcast on non-terrestrial radio to make more in royalties from Sound Exchange and from BMI, because again, you know, there should be more coming in from the composers' rights organizations. But really, again, this act will serve to address some of those issues. So, I mean, you all know, again, like these are the performance rights organizations that we're talking about: BMI, ASCAP, CSAC. There's GMR now, that's not on here, and then Sound Exchange purely for recordings. And you know, this was just to go back and reinforce the difference between, you know, publishing, the composition, and the sound recording. And I hate I hate to always use "I will always love you," but it's just so easy to do. Dolly Parton wrote the song, and Whitney Houston covered it, and this is a great example of the disparity in the rights afforded, not afforded, but the scope of protection of the rights afforded by the Copyright Act, because musical compositions just enjoy greater protection right now. But that said, that's why I say that it's really important to register with Sound Exchange. The fact that the Music Modernization Act extended copyright protection to pre-72 sound recordings tells me that, that's a signal that perhaps eventually the argument in favor of extending the performance right to sound recordings equal to that of compositions will probably happen. And when that happens, there's gonna be a lot more money. So it's important that everyone get ready for that. I'm not saying it's happening tomorrow, but I know if I were a musician, I would be ready. I'd be ready. I want that mailbox money, right? So, and if y'all don't want it, just designate it to me. I'm happy to take it. So, with BMI, the fees for composers, it's free. If you're a publisher, it's anywhere between $150 to $250, depending on what kind of legal entity you are. The ASCAP, they just do kind of an even split. It's $50 for composers, $50 for publishers. CSAC's invitation only. Sound Exchange is free, and it's so easy. It is so easy to sign up. In fact, they're making it easier and easier all the time. Now all you have to do is contact them, and they'll just call you and help you figure it out. So I highly recommend going ahead and registering with Sound Exchange. So, we can help you. We can help you, determine what accounts you need, figure out like how to best organize your music catalog. I have Sound Exchange's, their repertoire, their Excel document that, I can help you navigate. I just found another document on the Mechanical Licensing Collective's website for songwriters that we can help you go through and organize. We can help advise you on clearances that you need, register all of your accounts, talk about copyrights and whether it's worth it. We're happy to help do that. Just contact us and we'll set up an individual appointment so that you're not disclosing to all of the in the Zoom session, you're not disclosing any confidential information. That's certainly something that we want to avoid. So, with that said, what I would like to do now is to X out of this screen share and bring Lou in and talk to Lou about his experience with being a musician and trying to navigate administering and enforcing his rights, and with a focus on the various performance rights organizations and the degree to which they have been beneficial or not. So welcome, Lou. Why don't you unmute yourself, please, and introduce yourself, and don't be shy.
Hey, can you guys hear me? Hey, can you guys hear me? Yes.
I can.
Okay, good. Hi guys, I'm Blue Hill with the group Waterseed from New Orleans. And our parent company is we have an LLC that's called the Waterseed Music Group, which kind of functions as our record label. Well, it does function as our record label. And I've been in the music business for a few decades now and just working hard at doing exactly what Ashlye spoke about, which is we found a lot of friends that when I started college, there was this conversation about mailbox money from professors, and one of my professors is the son of Alan Toussaint, and he was talking about mailbox money and all the rest of that stuff, and it was like, wow, that stuff exists. And so it's something that was put into my head a long time ago when I was a teenager. And so when I started to venture off into my own career, I just started investigating it and finding how it could apply. I knew that with some of my favorite artists, they were legal fights that I was following, and I started to understand the importance of owning your music, knowing where your music was, knowing how to make money off of the music, and the importance during the 90s, the conflict or conversation or around publishing was pretty big. So I always was like, hey, your publishing is so important, you're publishing. So I really investigated it a whole lot to kind of, and it's always changing. As Ashlye said, the band is now releasing us 2 songs a month, and during COVID, and I went to copyright something, and it was like, nope, you have to do this form, and it's a max of 10, and this is the price. It's like this is horrible, but it's a whole different situation. But we're dealing with it. So things are changing in the industry very quickly, and I'm in another venture, and there's different reports about how much mailbox money is left on the table, and the numbers we pulled is very mysterious, but it was something like $500 million to like $2 billion worldwide of money that artists are not collecting. So it's something that you need to definitely look into if you're recording music. It's important because times have changed. So
Lou, how important is it to be proactive and making it easier to get yourself paid? And is it possible for you to forfeit certain rights or royalties if you're not proactive?
yeah, I mean, if you're not doing the work, and it's paperwork, it's the thing that no one likes to do, and musicians really hate it. We want to get the music, get out, and get love from our fans. That's what we want. We don't want to do all the paperwork and sit down a full day and then keep records of where it is and how it functions and all the rest of that. It's more than beneficial to do it. I can speak for myself, even with the band, when we do our splits on who wrote what, who arranged what. Look, I set that up so that it's automated, so that when we perform, I mean, I'm a big advocate for musicians across the board and artists to have their hands in a percentage in every bit of their intellectual property. It's something they created, and if you're not collecting the money, I don't know how factual this is, Ashlye can say, but I heard through another colleague that it was like, after so many years, look, the PROs can use that money, and all of this. It's crazy. So you're basically creating content that other people are basically getting paid for, and you're not collecting it because the money's sitting there. The venues, the radio stations, the TV stations, they all have to pay that money. The powers that be make sure they pay that money. It's up to the artists to go and collect the money. So we get quarterly checks. I report all of our shows, everything I can to make sure that, and I'm pretty sure we still have money left on the table too, but I'm doing my due diligence to at least say, hey, look, I created this, and you can't keep the money to yourself. You got to pay me. So, yeah.
So how many types of royalties do you collect? In other words, are there different royalties for record sales, songwriter mechanical royalties, performance rights royalties, composer's rights, recording rights, broadcast recording rights? Tell us about that.
So we collect everything we possibly can. So sales, definitely, we collect for that. Of course, a few of our albums are tied up in record deals, so that's a little hairy, but we're fortunate enough where our record deals, they don't touch the publishing, so that's cool. So where we make the most money, of course, depending on the licensing position, it depends on the contract. Sometimes we're sent a contract where they're like, well, this is a flat out fee. We'll pay you X amount of dollars to write this song or to use the song. But once it's used, once we pay you this money, we actually we control this song for this purpose. We can perform the song, we can do whatever we want to, but for that purpose, they've paid the one-time fee, and we've waived our rights for that project. But that needs to be a very pretty penny for someone to do that with your work. It has to be valuable. And I will say to a lot of very interested artists, like there's some TV shows that are very popular that even, it was a huge issue with the group because it was basically an online thing. Submit your music, you'll be on this top 10, top 5 TV show. But in the small print, it basically says, when you submit your music, you lose all rights to it. It's theirs. They can use it as many times as they want to. And there's no pay. It's just like, hey, but you'll be on the TV show. So you got to be careful with that kind of thing. The place where we actually get paid the most, if it's not a situation where we've been fortunate enough to have maybe Disney call or somebody and say, hey, could you write a song for this? Those have been great paydays, but where we can actually control most of our money and where we see most of our royalties coming in is from the performance rights stuff. So artists, I don't know if performers, you get paid to, when you play your stuff publicly in a venue, they collect for that. So your PROs collect for that. And so we became very diligent about collecting those royalties every time we play to get the money. So I'll give you an example, and I only know these numbers because I've been researching it like on the next level for the past 8 months. So, you know, Spotify, you're getting like 0.0001 cent or whatever, then YouTube, and it varies depending on how much, and they make it very complicated to really figure out what's going on. But if you write the song and you perform that song in a venue that holds from 0 to 250 people, you get 53 cents every time you play that song. That's the highest return of any of those streaming places. So for a band like myself, we play pretty much original songs. So 20, 25 original songs a show. And before COVID, we're doing over 200 shows a year. So it was, you know, it was like quarterly. We're like, cool, we're promoting ourselves. And so we say we're not playing Beyonce. We're going to play our own stuff because we make money off that. So that's where we see our biggest return, is in the live performance and collecting those cents, you know, when we perform.
Thank you, Lou. So how, you know, tell me about your experience with I mean, you're obviously not collecting from venues because venues are registered. Well, they're supposed to be registered, you know, with BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC, NGMR now. And they have blanket licenses, and that's, you know, where you're getting your revenue. But have you experienced, or have you noticed through any of your statements some gaps where you may have performed and they're not included in the accountings because some of the clubs just don't have, you know, their licensing together?
Yes. So we've noticed some gaps. We've been researching our statements quite thoroughly over the past, I want to say 3 months, just to, I mean, it's COVID. What else are we doing? So we've been researching the stuff to try to see, you know, how much money we're making and what the gaps are. And let me tell you, the moment, and it's a local club in New Orleans, we had a regular residency there, and this particular club owner knew that. He's going to report everything. And the moment he found that out, I got like a tax form, like, yep, fill it out, blah, 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 blah. He made me immediately he started reporting what he was paying to me. And I'm just like, he's like, you report everything, right? He's like, yeah, well, fill this out. And so he made me go through the whole tax process with him. And it was cool. It's like, hey, whatever, fair game, whatever. But yeah, their club owners do not like it because they still have to pay the money, but I think they're kind of concerned, like, if everybody gets hip to this, it's going to get weird. But it's yours. You're entitled to it, and you have to make a stand on it.
And the clubs that are paying these licenses, like you said, have to pay them anyway. So right. I think this is a real opportunity. It's interesting because, you know, as you know, I've been talking with a lot of musicians, and a lot of those musicians are on this Zoom today, about, you know, establishing better, you know, business practices, fairer wages, better, you know, workplace standards. And I think this is very much part of that conversation. Making, yes. You know, how can you approach venues that may not have their licenses, and instead of adopting the, oh, you know, screw you for not having your shit together, help usher them through that process, you know, in good faith. And that doesn't always work, but it is certainly, you know, it is certainly a pathway forward, you know, if it does. And like you said, I mean, if you're getting paid more for your own live performances of your own original content, I mean, that to me would give me an incentive to do that. It sounds like that worked for you in the example that you're talking about.
Yeah, is a massive difference. And look, that number goes up. So if you're playing a 0 to 250 seater, that's 53 cents per song you play for that place. But if you play a 500 seater, that number goes up. 1,000 seater, it keeps going up. So, and you can control it. So you can literally say, I am playing this many songs tonight, you know, and this is what my price point is going to be. You're controlling, and you should have a pretty good idea of what that return should be, opposed to, again, these streaming services where it's like, I have 1 million spins. Hey, I made $100, maybe, you know, so. Yeah. You know, yeah. And the great thing about it, if you have your PROs and all your paperwork set up properly, look, that goes to your bandmates. So your bandmates are getting quarterly checks on your reporting, and it helps them feel like, wow, I'm getting, you know, mailbox money because my band is reporting these. So if I write, you know, a song and someone else writes a song, we're splitting that 53 cents every time that song plays. I don't have to send them a check. The PRO sends them a check. All I'm doing is reporting. So it's a great way just to help your band make money as well.
Right. I mean, who would have thought that we'd be in a situation where instead of fighting over, the proceeds from physical CDs, that you're selling out of the trunk of your car, it shows that, these platforms would empower you as bands not to like get into those scuffles. I mean, as long as
Yeah.
they're registered, then you don't have to have some of those hard discussions. I mean, in the beginning, when you're talking about splits, but afterward, as long as everyone is registered with these sites, I mean, like you said, in theory, and often is the case in practice, that's taken care of. So you don't have to have those awkward conversations. Now, I mean, it is kind of depressing that the public performance rights are, amount to more income these days than record streams, not sales, as I
Right.
say over and over and over again, because I think it's important for people to think of that way. I think that music industry has failed to do so, and the fact that narrative has not been well established has resulted in what we're talking about today in part. But I digress. I think that, again, I mean, like your example is a really great one. How you can really take the bull by the horns and go after your income that you're due.
Yeah.
That venues are already paying for in large part. So I mean, that's an easy thing to do. And I noticed that there was some questions in the chat about like how you report, your playlist, who you report to, what that process looks like.
Yeah. So in this, let's talk about the process. So I did not start off right. I'm going to be honest. It was, there's so much you have to do as a musician. So I'll give you a phase. Like my first phase, released the first project independently. My first independently released project is like, oh, okay. I was selling CDs. Like, actually, I was making a lot of money selling CDs. It's like, because it was, everybody was buying CDs. Streaming hadn't really kicked in, so we'd make a lot of money. And I said with that, okay, cool. We're selling the CDs, independent release. We're making a lot of money. Keep going. Then the next step with the next project, I was like, oh, well, I've heard, how can I get this on iTunes? Because at this time, it was only a few distributors, so you didn't have TuneCore and all the rest of these people. And that was my next goal. Like with the next project, I want to get it to iTunes. And then the next project, okay, cool. How do I publish it? And so with every time I release something, I implemented a little bit more of what I knew was there. And so if you're just starting out, get like one part of it done, understand that part, then go with because what's going to happen if you should register for as much as possible, but it can be overwhelming. So, and then you're not tracking it and you're not managing it well. So get like mentally into the space of, I need to manage this. Like I literally look at my streaming numbers and download numbers every morning because I need to send to my team and make sure that everybody's understanding how we're doing, what's happening, to just understand the industry. And you combine that with the fact that all these numbers are spread across a million platforms. So you have to pull some information. So it's all over the place. But don't get overwhelmed, but keep taking like steps forward. Like never just settle in, especially during COVID. Look, I hope more than anything, this is proven to artists the importance of being creative and having great intellectual property, because there are musicians who are still making money because they understand, I'm creating music. I can't make the stage right now, but I can do other things to repurpose my property. And can I license it? Can I, whatever, what can I do? You have these tools to find alternative ways and tap into diversifying your streams of income. And all too often, I guess here in New Orleans, we rely on the one stream of income is like, how much am I making for this gig? And there's so many other areas of revenue building in music. But again, artists aren't locking in, but someone's getting paid from it. Trust me.
Right. But we don't want to de-emphasize like the importance of the live music or live performance revenue, because I mean that's
Of course not.
most of the money is. But you're right. I mean, there are so many other revenue streams that cumulatively add up. I mean, they just do. In some cases, it's pretty significant. So I think that's very important. But I really like the way that you addressed how daunting it can be in the beginning when you're first getting organized. And it is. I mean, when I start a research project, I hate it. I'm like, oh God, I got to do
Mhm.
You know, I mean, I don't want to do it. And I do it all the time. I'm a lawyer. I don't want to research. I don't want to write it down. I don't want
Mhm.
to do that. I want to go out and have fun, right? I mean, we
Uh-huh.
all are. But, you know, once I get in that mode, then it's like, oh, okay, this is, you know, I've got a rhythm, you know, I feel like
Mhm.
progress. That makes me feel good. And, you know, the more, you know, repetitive, you know, that becomes, the easier it becomes, and the
That's
less
right.
reluctant I am down the road. And I think that that's what you were trying to drive home. Like, once you get, you know, the ball rolling on this, you don't have to figure out everything at once, but just start it. And then how much easier is it for you now that you have your system in place to make sure that it's updated?
It's a process. It's not the look. These systems are clunky still. You know, they're not necessarily the best, but I have apps, and I discipline myself every time after every show. Look, before I go out to the audience, and when I'm maybe backstage and just toweling off or whatever, I open up my phone and I report what I'm doing immediately, and then I head out, to the bar or talk to somebody. And I had to make it a routine in my process. And I had to, look, what motivates me is, look, I think about my family and legacy as well. And you have to think about these things too. The more you understand it while you're alive, the better you can pass that on to your kids or to your husband, your wife, whoever, your mom, whoever. If this stuff is all over the place, um, it's you're spending your whole life doing something, and this could very well be stuff that sends your kids to college or your grandkids to college, and you need to understand it now, and your band members need to understand it. So if something does happen to you, you're in a position where they understand the numbers before you're gone, so they know, no, this is my percentage and this is how I've been
Right.
getting paid for years. So you want to, so I think about it from that, like, it's my responsibility um, to my family and the people I love to understand that I've spent, most of my life creating, and, I'm leaving it for them, and you move on from it from there. So I think, for those people who need that little extra push, it's like, no, you're actually creating something. You wouldn't create Coca-Cola and just say, hey, whoever, when I'm going,
Yeah.
so yeah.
See ya. Yeah.
Right.
Right. Never, same goes for the, Popeye's recipe. That's
Exactly.
in my mailbox today. I need that check.
Exactly.
I'm just going to, uh, ride the coattails of what you were saying, but also suggest this, for those of you who, would like to see, your revenue, inherited by whether you have heirs or whoever, whether you have a will. I can tell you one thing for sure through my own experience, and that is, if you do not have all of your catalog organized, all those splits that Lou was talking about, step forth. If you're not clear as to the rights that you hold, then that money that is going to go to, your son to go to college is going to go to some lawyer instead, right?
Yeah.
Because it's going to take a long time. It's going to be an arduous task to go through and organize your catalog. And I mean, all you have to do to prevent that is organize it yourself. Otherwise, you're paying, Joe Schmo $500 an hour or more to do, what is basically clerical work that you know how to do better than, I would, right? So it's really, that's really an important point to drive home, because, I mean, to the extent that you care about your legacy or the value of your work, I mean, to create it, why not make sure that, it's controlled by those who you care about, after you're gone.
Mm-hmm.
I know that gets a little existential, but whatever. I mean, hell, it's 2020. Let's go there, right? Shit.
Yeah. Hey, look, I'm a Prince fan, and I cringe when I think about, like, the mess that his estate is in. So, it's like,
Yeah.
I got to do my work, so.
Yeah, I've had a lot of experience dealing with especially some of the legacy artists here, their estates, and oh my God, I mean, you talk about revenue that's sitting in, some corporate, rights organization's account that's not going to the heirs of, some of our famed and iconic artists. It just makes my stomach hurt,
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much you can do, right? And that's why it's important to do it while you're in control,
That's right.
sound mind.
That's right.
And then, that kills several birds with one stone. So you've got your catalog organized. You can submit it to the Music Mechanical Licensing Collective, to the performance rights organizations, whether it's BMI, ASCAP, or Sound Exchange. I mean, you don't even have to have a will if you don't want. I mean, we're not talking about estate planning today. But I mean, if you have your catalog organized, I mean, hell, I mean, there may be, I mean, the Jazz Archives or the Jazz Museum or Amistad. I mean, may be looking to, to put it in their historical archives. They don't always wait till people are gone to do that either. So there could be value in that, educational usages. So just something to think about. Always more ways to tap into those revenue streams, right?
Right. And the better organized you are right now, you don't want to lose any opportunities for music licensing or anything like that. If you're in a band or a group, or you have several producers, or always, you need to leave the room with like an understanding, email, something, it'd be nice to have something official, but you need to leave the room with them having an understanding of what it is. And if anything happens, because I know, again, legacy artists who, there was one I was working with who had a 7-figure deal to buy his catalog on the table, and he couldn't do it because the rights are everywhere. They're all over the place. And he didn't even have the power to sign the piece of paper because there was nothing established to say, okay, I can accept this money and disperse it to the producers myself, or deal with it that way. We have agreements. There were no agreements. So I know, look, the big thing now in music is everybody, find a producer, find a producer, find a producer. And I bought this beat. And look, there was just something with EMI. EMI called us, EMI Sony. They said EMI Sony's doing a compilation CD of up and coming artists. They need songs like this. Hey, we're interested in blah, 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 blah songs. It was a good friend. He's like, Lou, can you write some stuff? Can you whatever? I said, sure, send me the paperwork. We went through the paperwork. It was cool. It was whatever, but the biggest issue he had was there were like 20 songs that were supposed to be on the list, but literally out of the 20, only 4 survived. Like 4 artists survived, and they had to do it all over again because all of the people submitting downloaded songs from the internet. They got this producer and then couldn't find this producer, and they said they couldn't get the deal. They could not close on the deal. So EMI had to go back to them like, we really love this song, and it turned out, the producer doesn't want to give me the rights, or I don't own this. And there was a lot of things, whatever mechanism Sony uses, they were able to digitally like get the imprint from the song and find out, hey, this sample is from here. You don't own the rights to it. Send us the paperwork to show you own the rights or you can use it. And it literally knocked out 16 people from that project. So you want to have, when they call, same thing with a Disney or somebody, if somebody's got like, look, I got $10,000 for you. We would like to use this song in this major film. And next thing you know, you're like, oh, well, when the band broke up or whatever, the producer, or we're not dating anymore or something. I can't make it legal. At least have something. So it's like, hey, look, I'll pay you your share. But I have had horror stories where it's just people like, I don't even want the money. I refuse to see you successful. So no. So go ahead and just have these conversations, get them in writing. Make sure that you understand what it is, because it's important. And again, I'm going to say more than ever right now, it's in what I'm seeing, and I'm pretty sure, Ashlye, you're seeing too, is tech companies are sucking up massive amounts of intellectual property by means of music catalog. And you want to at least be in a position where if they offer you a ton of money, you can say, I don't know. I mean, Trombone Shorty closed on a great deal with that. And I don't want to say the number, but it was nice, and all of his ducks were in a row, and he's cool. He made the money and he can move on and keep doing what he's doing. But if that was not the case, he would have had to walk away from it. So
Right.
make sure it's real. And if musicians are always trying, how can I get to the money? I'm telling you, you can get to it. You just have to make sure your ducks are in a row.
Well, that is an awesome line to end for now on, and open up to the audience for any other questions they might have. And I guess we could probably use the raise the hand tool. I think that we've addressed pretty much everything.
We have a few in the chat, I think.
Yeah. Anyone else got anything? And, of course, you can email us. So if we miss something, then, let us know. I mean, you've got our information.
I
Go
see
ahead,
a
Luke.
I see a question around. It's from Scott.
Oh,
He says, on another note, do you know if there is any issues with performing the same song twice in one night? For example, on a 3-set gig or something playing. So, Scott, the way I think they regulate it, and I guess Ashlye could talk about this, is that it's per venue. So when I submit my set list, I have a generic set list. If I'm on tour for an album, our last album was Say Yeah. So I have a Say Yeah set list. I know the songs we're gonna play, and I pre-save that. So every night we play it, I'm just hitting, yep, send this one to my PRO. So and then they charge that venue for that. So I don't know if it would raise a flag. I mean, if you're playing several venues in one night, yeah, you report each venue, and you do it that way. And I think so that would be my answer to that. And then there was a question earlier about, does it matter how long the songs are? It does not. You play the song, long as you've played the song, so artists in New Orleans, we have 20-minute songs. In Atlanta, they have 3-minute songs. It just depends on where you are, but it's still your song. So yeah, they don't have to be super long.
that's good advice. Anyone else got anything? Looks like there's another question. Establishing the shared songwriters. I'm reading the question from Joni.
Mm-hmm.
They add to the song, establishing the shared songwriters. Okay, so you're asking Joni whether how to establish the splits, and really that's something that you just do by agreement, and that's something that we can talk about. Just give us a call, and we can set up a time to go over that with you. And I have my MO is to establish written agreements that are short, sweet, to the point, and totally enforceable, and not overwhelming. So I have ways to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? I realize that the Q&A, on Zoom is a little tricky. So again, if you all exit the meeting, leave the meeting, and have another question, and why didn't I think of that? Just shoot us an email. It's really easy to respond, and I can copy Lou so that you've got a seal of approval as well.
I'd be happy to help. And also, I think there was one more, from Woolworth, if you're still there.
Oh, Dave's got a question. Sorry, my chat is. I've got it.
No, I'm. It's fine. He says, who do you report your live playlist to again? So, my primary PRO is BMI, and they have a great app called BMI Live. And so I set that up online, and I just pull all of my registered songs in there. And like I said, at the end of every show, I just submit which set list I played and anything like that. So yeah, it's pretty fluid, but you have to remember to do it.
So I'm getting a question about tips on YouTube. YouTube's a whole other world. As from an attorney's perspective, I would advise all of you to make sure that you're tracking your content on YouTube and ensuring that all of it is authorized. But the way the revenue is distributed mostly from, obviously there's some public performance rights, but then there's the ad sharing revenue, and that gets that's tricky. So I don't know if I answered that question, if that was what you were asking, but that's something that we can talk about in greater detail individually.
Yeah, and if you're asking any tips on YouTube content ID, maybe that question is about how to, get your music cleared, or if you could find out if it's being tracked. I know that if it's about how is it being tracked, most of your quasi, I think, DistroKid TuneCores, they have the function that says monetize.
Right.
Monetize it, and then they'll track it for you. So
right.
Yeah, at least they'll send a warning to the person if they use it. Now, I don't know their pay system for paying you for other people using it, but I do know that they'll at least say, hey, this content belongs to whoever. So yeah.
Right. And it's important to keep track of all that and to make sure that you notify YouTube if your content is being used without authorization. So, because they don't always catch everything. It's a pretty big platform. So
okay, he said he uses it to advertise beat licensing. So
yeah, come see me. Let's talk about because we don't want to disclose much more. I don't think, but yeah, that's probably a good 45-minute conversation for me. So unless Lou, you've got an answer that's pretty quickly.
No, I think it's I can't answer it right because it could be
Right.
little variables that
Sure.
that exist.
But it's a good question.
It
So
is.
it's just another reason why we're here. So
Yeah.
all right, well, I'm going to pass it. Lou, you're awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean,
Hey, thank you for having
you're
me.
super committed to New Orleans music industry and ecosystem, and you've been a huge champion of advocacy and the rights of others, and you've led by example. So I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you for having me.
Thank you. And I'll pass the mic to Jean, and I'll mute myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ashley and Lou. Really, I think a great presentation. I certainly learned a lot. I know our audience did as well. So thanks all of y'all for joining us. I do can't be remiss without thanking the National Endowment for the Arts that helped support this with funding for the Ella Project, and our other sponsors as well, but especially the National Endowment for the Arts. So your tax dollars at work, we're happy to help them work in this situation. As Ashley talks about, best way to contact us is probably through the website, ellanola.org. There's our application for legal services there. There's also just a contact us button that emails us. Our emails are both on there as well to get in touch with either Ashley or myself. Following this up, I'm going to send out an evaluation. Please let us know how we did, but also importantly, let us know what you want to see next. You know, we're really beginning to program heavily as we've come to the reality that we're going to be doing this virtual thing for longer than we may have thought of back in July. And we want to make sure that we can create good content. And in my opinion, this certainly was good content. So it was great to see everybody. And everyone have a lovely day. Thanks again to Ashley and Lou Hill.